Hi, I'm Alison Crouch, Pilates instructor, restorative exercise specialist, and these ain't your mama's sit-ups. Let's rethink how you use your core. Always be careful with your health and safety. It's really important to be sure of how you're using your body before you go about using it. We really want you to stay safe and healthy. Everybody has an idea of what they would like to look like that they think looks fit and sexy and healthy. The big lie about ab work is that sometimes what we're aiming for isn't as healthy as we think it is. And if this picture reflects what you are aiming for, you may be sacrificing more of your health than you ever thought possible. Core work is something that we hear a lot about these days. Everybody's talking about using your core exercises. Keep in mind the core is the entire torso, and the core contains your digestive system, your reproductive system. It contains parts of your cardiovascular system. Too tight abdominal muscles, too tight core muscles restrict the function of these particularly important systems. That can contribute to digestive issues, it can contribute to menstrual cramping and pain, and it can contribute to faulty breathing mechanics. If your diaphragm is restricted because your ribs aren't moving, you're not going to breathe so well as you think you might. So what is your core really made of? Your core is a lot of things, but we're going to talk specifically today about these layers of muscle. The surface is the six-pack, or what my husband calls the chiclet stomach muscle. That's the one that you see in the front of your core. It's the one that you see really tightly looking really visible. The mid-layer obliques run on an angle. The lower obliques run on an angle one way. The upper obliques run on a different angle, so they create that X across your torso. The deeper layer, the transverse abdominis, is not really visible to the naked eye. It runs underneath the first two layers of muscle. And it's the one that we're most concerned about. It's the one we want to think about most in Pilates and restorative exercise. The deepest layer we're going to talk about today, the psoas, is not actually an abdominal muscle, but it is a key component to your core. It's not visible in this picture. It's not visible to the outside eye when you're looking at a body. And if you've never heard of it, don't worry about it. We're going to get to that. And for a really strong, really healthy core that's going to do everything that you need it to do, all these layers need to be working. They need to be able to stretch and to lengthen and to contract. They need to be pliable in order to be able to be strong. So what happens? What happens when we do traditional sit-ups? Well, we usually use a lot of momentum. You're usually gripping with your legs and your hip flexors. Often you're pulling with your arms, you're pulling with your head and your neck, and it's not getting into the deep muscles, the deep core activation that we're really looking for. Those old school sit-ups, that's not good form. If you feel like you're really pulling really hard and you're gripping into your feet and your legs, it's not useful core work. How you place your body is key to really getting to the core of the matter when you're talking about abdominal work. So where do you go to get there? You need to go to a neutral torso. People, certainly in the Pilates world, we talk a lot about neutral pelvis. Neutral pelvis is when your pelvic heads, or the hip bones at the front, and the pubic bones, which are the bones at the front of your pelvis at the bottom, they're level, so that if you're lying down, you put a teacup on your lower pelvis, it's not going to tip in any direction. That's a neutral pelvis. What doesn't always get talked about is a whole neutral torso or neutral spine. That means you have a neutral pelvis, where your pelvic heads and your pubic bones are level, and your spine and your rib cage are neutral. So that means the bottom of your rib cage below your bra strap is touching the floor, and your neck is relaxed. There's no big pull up into your neck and into your spine in order to get your pelvis neutral. For most people, this isn't possible. For most people, there needs to be some accommodating at one end or the other in order to have either neutral relaxed ribs or a neutral relaxed pelvis. How do you deal with that in a regular workout class? Usually, especially in Pilates, you'll hear the term imprint. So that's where you take your pelvis to a 30-degree tilt out of neutral, brings your lower back a little closer to the floor, brings your pubic bones higher than your pelvic heads. So that protects your back. It means that you can bring your legs off the floor. It means you can feel you're doing your abdominal work. But what it's really getting into is more the surface muscle. This is where you're favoring your rectus abdominis and your lower obliques, and not so much your transverse abdominis, which is that deep muscle that we really want to get into. If you need to imprint in order to do your abdominal work, it means that you're not getting into those deep core muscles. And one of the things you might want to experiment with is doing some modifications to let yourself get into neutral. It's a bit humbling. It means you need to step back and do less, but it means you're going to use a whole different group of muscles in your core work. It means you're going to actually settle into, if you're a Pilates person, you're going to settle into something that Joseph Pilates was really striving for and that we've a little gotten away from in our modern approach to abdominal exercises. So how do you know you're cheating? Sometimes you can have a friend take a look, you can have an instructor take a look, you can look in a mirror, you can poke around with your hands, but here's some of the things you're going to see pretty commonly. If you get your ribs nicely settled, you may find that to do that, you need to tuck pretty far through neutral and into a real pelvis tipping. So that's going to overuse your lower psoas. It's going to pull into your thighs and your hip flexors and your surface abdominals. Your thigh bones may pull up off the floor because they're following that tip of your pelvis. And you're underusing your deep core muscles. You're underusing your transverse. If you get your legs nice and heavy on the floor so that your pelvis is neutral, you may find your spine and your ribs have needed to lift off the floor instead. And what you end up with is this pull into your back muscles. So you're overusing your upper psoas. You're overusing your back and your neck. And again, you're underusing the deep core, the transversus, and your alignment is not really working for you. So what's alignment? Why does alignment matter? We're going to align your spine for neutral, which brings your pelvis heavy to the mat. You can see there's no pulling of the legs away from the floor in this picture. The legs and the pelvis are both settled down. You do allow for a light space in your lumbar spine. The lower back is not pulling away from the floor. You don't want to contract your back muscles for this to happen. You want to be able to be in a position that lets that light space exist and still have the bottom of your rib cage heavy to the mat. Your neck should be relaxed. There's no pulling into the tongue and into the jaw. And you may not be able to do all of this yet. Most people can't. But give it time, see if you can work at it, and see what happens. It matters. This stuff actually matters for getting into your deep core, and it makes for better work. Keeping your alignment markers in place isolates the body part you intended to use, and that would be your core muscles, all of them. It means you're protecting yourself from injury as a result of going farther than you can actually go. If you pull your legs off the floor into a tabletop position and you feel strain in your back or your neck, you are going farther maybe than your body is able to go. Finding your alignment markers means that you can be confident you're doing the best abdominal work in a way that doesn't risk going farther than you can go safely and effectively. One of the things we're doing here is changing some old movement and postural habits. That can be hard. It can be hard for your brain. It's hard for your understanding of how abdominal work is supposed to happen. But anytime you're using muscles that you don't usually use, that's great. You're increasing your caloric output and your circulation. You're increasing your understanding of how your body could work. And that's a pretty good reason for changing old movement and postural habits. There's a really good payoff to that. So what do I do about it? To truly use your core, you need to move slowly and thoughtfully to avoid those habits that we're trying to change. When you go quickly and you use momentum, you go farther, you go faster, and it may be more fun, but that's when we go to our habits, is when we don't have time to think about how we're moving. It's useful to identify all your core muscles and what they do. A little bit of anatomy goes a long way in helping you figure out how to move well. Learn how to identify the places where you cheat, because we all do it a little differently, and eliminate them in at least these 3 positions that we're going to work on in this next little sequence, and you can apply them in all kinds of different exercises. If you like what we're doing in this, you can download the free exercise video that comes with signing up for our newsletter, and then you can apply them in a whole series of continuously moving exercises. So the first thing we're going to do is organize your deep core. The psoas muscle is one of the deepest and most important core muscles you have, and you may never have heard of it. This muscle, there's one on each side of your spine. They attach to your spine. They attach to your discs through their fascia, which is a connective tissue. They attach to the pelvis and to the top of the inside of the thigh bone. You can see in this picture there's a whole series of attachments down through the vertebrae. There's one long line, a bit like a pork tenderloin, that runs through the pelvis, and then it narrows up and attaches to the thigh bone. You can't quite see that in this picture. But because of the organization of the muscle, it affects how the ribs, the spine, the pelvis, and the legs all move in relation to each other. We've probably talked more about the psoas as a hip flexor over the last 20 years or so. And we're now starting to understand that if you look at the number of attachments it has on your spine relative to the one small attachment on your leg bone, it really has a huge effect on where your spine lives and where your ribs live because they attach to your spine relative to your pelvis, more so than where your leg is. If your psoas is too tight, it affects the positioning of your stomach muscles so that you can't get your abdominal muscles to fire up properly no matter how hard you try. It's a complicated little muscle. Well, actually, it's a complicated big muscle. So if you're interested, you can check out my blog post about the psoas. We did a great psoas release workshop. You can see some pictures and a little discussion about how the psoas works. So let's get into some psoas release. You're going to have a bolster. If you have a bolster, that's great. If you don't have a bolster, stack up some sofa cushions. If you have a half dome that you can use to support your head, that's great. If you don't, roll up a towel, roll up a yoga mat, roll up a softer sofa cushion. You want to put that support under your shoulder blades and your head, but let the bottom of your rib cage sink down. So if you're a woman, you want to have the bolster around just above your bra strap. If you're a guy, you want to have your bolster kind of around where you would have a heart rate monitor would be strapped if you've ever done that. And then you're going to let everything relax. You want to make sure that you have a nice continuous curve from the base of your skull down through your neck, down through your ribs, down through your spine. That may not be what happens with you when you start. You may look more like the picture on the right where your ribs are all pulled up off the floor. Let everything just settle down. Don't try and force it. Don't try and make it go anywhere. We're just looking for what happens if you release these deep connective muscles that run through your core. There's a difference between stretching and releasing. Stretching usually has a sensation attached to it. Releasing, not so much. So it feels like you aren't doing anything important, but this is really crucial. It's really important for getting your center set in a way that allows you to do the best abdominal work you can. So really let this happen. Don't stay for 15 seconds and then think, okay, well, this is boring and I'm done. Hang out, listen to some music, see what happens, observe the positioning of your back as you hang out for maybe 10 minutes or so. You can do this as often as you want. There's no limit to it. Try not to put the bolster too low. We're not trying to increase that curve up under your back. We want to give some space for your ribs to soften down onto the floor. So here you can see the difference between before and after. In the picture on the left, you can see my sternum is still really pulled up on an angle towards my chin. My ribs are lifted. You can see a little bump at the bottom of my rib cage. And you can see there's a pulled up space at the bottom of my ribs pulling into my lower back. It means that my neck, my chest, and my pelvis are all out of alignment. And my abdominals, particularly my upper abdominals, which are sadly underused by most of us, cannot engage properly. In the picture on the right, I'm closer to neutral. The tight muscles pulling the body out of alignment are closer to where they should be. It means my transverse and my upper obliques can fire as a group the way they should. And I'm just in a better, more relaxed, released position so I can start working my transverse abdominis. So let's talk about that a little bit. This is the muscle you can't see. This is the deepest of your abdominal muscles. The fibers of the transverse abdominis run transversely, which is why it's called the transverse abdominis. They run sideways, and there are 3 segments, and you can see in the picture that there's a little bit of an angle at the bottom that changes slightly in the middle and changes again a little at the top. So your transverse comes in 3 components, and so you can feel a little bit more at the bottom doing one thing, a little bit more in the middle. You can really get more focus into the upper transverse abdominis, is the part that most people have not really put a lot of action into, and we're going to try and change that. This is the muscle that is most important for skeletal support. This is your posture and alignment muscle. It's hard to feel. If you feel lots of stomach muscle work, you're probably feeling your surface muscles, your obliques and your rectus abdominis, rather than so much your transverse. It's not a big sensing muscle in terms of what you feel. This is the pooch protector. If your belly comes up when you engage your abdominals, your transverse abdominis is not really working super well. It's the muscle that holds everything into that nice corset container that we talk about in Pilates. If you really work hard, you're going to be overcoming the transverse. It's the one that you really want to be on all the time at maybe like 3%, not 15 or 20 or 25%, because then it can't move as responsively as we want it to when all your other muscles come on. So sometimes you work less to work better. You let the other layers get out of the way and release the abdominals in towards the spine without moving the pelvis or the ribs or the spine out of neutral. And it's really hard to do. This is a key piece of information. Your transverse abdominis does not move your ribs relative to your pelvis. Think about that again. When you engage your stomach muscles and you're engaging your deep core, it should not tuck your pelvis in. It shouldn't round your lower back. It shouldn't push your ribs anywhere. You want to be able to maintain a nice, long, graceful line between your ribs and your pelvis without having to shift some other part of your body in order to make that happen. So, here's a little picture of transverse activation. You do want to keep your pelvis and your ribs stable relative to each other, so they're not going to move. And you want to keep your abdominals low and wide, so they're draping across your skeleton rather than squeezing. And you should be able to hug the muscles in around your torso without any of that moving. And then if you look over at the picture on the right, you can see how my belly has pushed up, right? So here I'm working too hard. I've squeezed the core too tight and I'm not getting that deep core activation. So, full disclosure, I'm 48, I have 2 teenagers. In all the pictures to come, you will see I'm not super skinny, right? I do have some surface to my body. When you're talking about your abdominals draping low and wide, it's not about what's on top. You might still be able to grip a little something that's a result of eating cheese and drinking wine. That could happen. It's okay. So now what are we going to do? Now you've got an idea of how to release your psoas. You have an idea of what your psoas is and where your transverse abdominis lives. Your back and abdominals are kind of ready to go, and now you can get to work. We're going to change the mindset here. Sometimes when we think about core, we really think about going for the burn. Here, we're not going to do that because we're looking for the transverse, which is that less sensate of the muscle groups. We're going to go for steady, controlled movements that activate the deep core. And this again is a bit counterintuitive, but if you include release and stretch time in your ab workouts, you will get optimal effectiveness of your abdominal work. It's actually really helpful, more so than just going for a continuous activation of sit-ups. You want to aim to hold positions or continue movements that you do in this kind of work for up to a minute, but stopping whenever is appropriate for you. You may not be able to go for a minute to start with. And never ever continue to a point of pain. Don't go farther in an action. Don't go farther in a stretch when you feel pain. That is your body's sign that you should stop. So here's a little note on props. I like props. I think props are incredibly helpful, and I don't think props are cheating. Supporting your body where it can do the best work is responsible and effective when it comes to doing the best possible workout you can. Using props doesn't make the work easier in a bad way. It may make it easier for you to tap into better core work and spare you from injury, which is always a good thing. You can be creative. If you don't have a bolster, stack up sofa cushions. If you don't have a yoga mat or a half dome, you can roll up a towel or a yoga mat. And this may be a key for you to really get your core to fire up in a way that happens in your core and not in those cheat muscles. And I can't emphasize this enough, so I'm going to say it again. If you feel pain or discomfort anywhere in your body while trying these exercises, stop. Pain is a really important signal that your nervous system is sending to you that says, this isn't working. You can always increase abdominal work at a slow and responsible pace. There's no shame in stepping back from what you've always done. Try some different stuff. Try the modifications. Stick with the psoas release. And you'll find your abdominal muscles will increase their capacity so brilliantly. It's just so great. And it really changes the way you do all your traditional stuff as well. So here's our first exercise. This is called tabletop because you're looking for your shins to end up at a level where if you put something on them, they wouldn't fall, like a table. Pretty obvious. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to try and aim to hold this for 1 minute. If that's appropriate for you. It might be appropriate to hold it for 15 seconds. If it hurts, it's appropriate to come down, wait for the next screen, and we're going to talk about it in a moment. So you do want to support your head to whatever height you need to support it for, that you can get the bottom of your ribs to soften down onto the floor without tucking your pelvis, right? So you're dropping the bottom of the rib cage down. And that should, hopefully, also bring the top of your rib cage down at the bottom where you can feel the curve of the bottom of your rib cage. You want to relax your thighs and your hip flexors so that you're not gripping really hard with your legs. And again, you want to have that low, wide abdominal across the pelvis where your pelvic heads are, so that it's not pushing up. If you look over to the picture on the right, I'm pulling into the back of my neck and shoulders. I've pulled my legs in, so I'm really straining with my hip flexors. I'm curling my pelvis around, so my butt's not heavy on the floor anymore. And all of that is reflecting in kind of a pooch in my belly, which is an indication that I'm straining my back a little bit. So if the picture on the right looks a little bit more like how you're feeling, you might want to do a modification. So let's take a look at that. The first modification would be do one leg at a time. Start finding that nice neutral position. Head relaxed, ribs easy on the floor, pelvis nice and level. Bring one leg up, keep the other one down. Focus on the low, deep abs. Maintain the neutral pelvis. Find that sense of almost work less to work more. If even that's not feeling great, try modification number 2. You can use a stability ball, a chair, the edge of your sofa. Support both your legs in this 90-degree angle position, and then focus on settling the pelvis into neutral without pulling up the ribs. If you can hold any of those positions for 1 minute, that's a fantastic endurance exercise, and then you can move on to the next one. The next one is the ab prep. This is the preparation for doing any of the exercises that involve full flexion in Pilates or in any other kind of workout, but it's great if you can go into those big exercises with a full sense of how your body's working to get you there. So you want to start in alignment. You want to start in a place where you feel like your neck is relaxed and you're not looking pulled back at the wall behind you. You want to keep with your ribs down on the floor. You want to have your ribs planted on the floor when you come back down. So take a look at this little video. As I bring my arms up and forward, you can see that I'm articulating through my spine. I'm trying to keep my legs heavy on the floor, keeping my pelvis heavy on the floor. I'm not really going all that high to start with. There's no need to fling yourself into it right off the bat. As you increase your mobility, as you increase the mobility of your back muscles and the activation of the front, then you can start to roll through, right? Arms come forward, head tips, drop the bottom of the rib cage down into the floor, and then roll past it to bring your body all the way forward and all the way back down. What you don't want to do is start with your arms all the way back and your head all the way back so that your ribs have pulled off the floor. That's extension. If you're going to try and go into flexion, you need to start without having been all the way back the other way. So if you can see in this video, there is momentum, my legs are coming up, my pelvis is tucking away from the floor. I'm not articulating through my spine, and I'm completely skipping those upper abdominals. It's all coming from just hauling my ribs and my legs towards each other. And it kind of looks like I'm getting up and around, but you can see the difference. One is nice and smooth, and one really isn't. And you can end up really straining your back doing it this way. So if it feels like you need to bring your legs off the floor to get yourself around, shift back to just coming up to the tips of the shoulder blades and really finding that sense of dropping the bottom of the rib cage into the floor so that you activate your upper abdominals before you start trying to pull into your hip flexors. So here's ab prep part 2. Just take a look at here. If you want to come up into flexion, you need to have a nice smooth curve of your upper body. And that means the back chain and the front chain are working consistently. So keep your eyes, your head and your neck aligned so that your eyes are looking forward and your arms are reaching forward and nice and long and stable. Don't try and lead with your chin, right? We sometimes think we're trying not to strain the neck by not pulling the head forward, but in fact it means that you're dropping your head back and you're straining the muscles in the front and the back of your neck and probably not getting fantastic ab work again. Ab prep part 3. This is what you do if you do in fact have neck pain. Place your hands behind your head and link your fingers behind the head. This is kind of the opposite of what a lot of us have been taught to do in terms of not hauling your head. So personal trainers will say put your hands beside your head and then pull up that way. But if you're feeling neck strain and your legs are coming off the floor, it doesn't really matter if you're not pulling with your arms, you're pulling with something else. So I'd actually like you to experiment with going the other way completely. Link your hands behind your head and then let the weight of your head fall back into your hands. And use your upper body. So shoulder blades go wide, elbows reach kind of on a 45-degree angle. They're not right out to the side and they're not right in front of you. And then you don't pull your head up with your hands and compress your neck. You continue to roll up with your core and you bring that nice stable organization of arms, shoulders, head and neck with you. So there is no strain on your neck. There's no strain in your upper body, but actually in this version you get a nice little extra arm work, which is kind of nice sometimes. So one of the other shapes that you can go into in terms of ab work is rotation. I love rotation. I think it's fantastic. You get to move all of your core muscles, right? You move your obliques, you move your rectus abdominis, you move your psoas, you move your spine. It's a really terrific shape. And mostly we end up thinking of rotation as just being oblique sit-ups, right? It's a compressive force. So, which is great. I love oblique sit-ups. They're super fun. But for maximum efficiency, you have to make sure that you're not displacing your rib cage forward, which is cheating the amount of work that you're doing with your stomach muscles. So you want to get into all those core muscles. You want to stretch and release your torso without shearing the ribs forward as you turn. You also want to avoid moving from your arm and your shoulder. This is a big thing for people who are hypermobile. They think they're turning their spine and their ribs, and in fact, really, it's just a displacement of the arm and the shoulder. In the stretch that's coming up in the next screen, you want to keep your knees anchored on the mat. You want to hang out here for long enough for your muscles to lengthen. So again, we're looking for that kind of hold for a minute and see what happens. The goal in this is not to go as far as you can, because that's where your body's going to go into your cheats. The idea is to find the true range of your abdominals and then start to allow more movement, to introduce more range in a place where you maybe are not accustomed to finding it. And it looks like this. This is the best place that you can start rotation. If you have 5 minutes in your day where you can lie down, do this. It's awesome. So you're going to lie on your side. You're going to roll your ribs around, not so much the arm and the shoulder. So you can see in the first picture, my arms are flat and my ribs have rotated towards the floor. If you look at the lines on my shirt, you can see they're kind of traveling sideways, and there's a straight up and down line between my sternum, my ribs, and my pelvis. So I'm all lined up, and what's really turning is my torso. If you look at the second picture, not so much with the lined up. So here, I'm not really turning. You can see in that straight up and down line where my spine should be, it's pulled way over to the side. My ribs have curled up or pushed up, and my pelvis is tipped back, and really the thing that's moving the most is my arm in my shoulder socket. So my hand is on the floor, but my shoulder is way off the floor. This is a cheat that we see a lot. And it's not an on-purpose cheat. Nobody's trying to cheat their abdominal work, but this is the habit that we get into when we think it's all about the range. When we're trying mostly to just go as far as we can, your body is pretty communicative and it's pretty helpful. If it wants to go as far as it can go and you let it, this is what you're going to get. So you're not getting the movement in your torso that you think you are. So if you can really just let yourself settle so that your arm's on the floor, and it could take weeks to get to that place. You might end up with your arm 6 or 8 inches off the floor, and that's okay. Let your ribs soften down in the way that works for you. Once you've done that, then you can do the active rotation. So this is a great, just a little warm-up rotation. You can sit on a stability ball, you can sit on a chair, you can sit on whatever you like. And when you turn, you want to keep your rib cage centered over the pelvis. So that's not letting your pelvis shift one way or the other. It's not letting your pelvis tip, right? So as you turn, your hips shift from one side to the other. When you do this, you're working more muscles in the abdominals and the side, and it leaves lots of space for your discs. That's important, especially if you know that you've got back stuff. You don't want to be compressing your discs. If you look at the picture on the right, I'm still turning, but I've actually pushed my ribs up and forward. It means I've gone farther than I can actually turn. My body's gone in a different plane of motion to give me more range. The problem is when you do a rotation like this, you'll feel work along the side and into the back instead of along the side and into the front. You're straining potentially your back muscles, and certainly you're overloading the vertebrae and the discs. At that point right where the arrow is, where there's, if you're turning and extending there, that's a lot of load on the discs. So those are some really great exercises. They are preparation exercises, right? These are your basics. These are your how do you get your alignment organized so that you can then apply it in other more exciting ways. So you can try these releases and exercises outlined here slowly. You can do them every day. They're not so intense that you can't do them as often as you want. You could certainly do them a couple of times in a row, cycle through them. If you'd like to do a more active version of these, then do the free download. We get to the end of the video, there will be a little link. You can get to the, you can subscribe to our newsletter, and then you can send you a link to the free download video. And then you can do a 10 or 12-minute exercise sequence where we'll go through these exercises with a couple of different modifications, and you'll get a sense of how they feel when you're doing them continuously. You can use these tips to avoid cheating in other variations of abdominal exercise. You want to be careful if you're in a big exercise class and there's 15 or 20 people and your instructor can't see you carefully. You don't want to be adding in a neutral spine to an exercise you're accustomed to doing in imprint and then do 15 or 20 of them. That's not maybe so safe. But you can start to notice where you use those cheats and then practice those exercises slowly on your own with these correctives in place. And if you do them regularly, your core is going to reorganize. Your deep core is going to come on more consistently. You're going to have more length and pliability to all of the muscles. And as they wake up, they will fire more frequently in your day-to-day life, which means you're getting a little bit of more efficient work regularly, all the time, whenever you're moving around. Come and visit us at the website at boomerangpilates.ca and subscribe to the newsletter. Once you've done that, I'll be happy to send you a link to your free video download. You can do the exercises on the video as often as you like, covering the principles that we learned in this presentation so that you can improve your activation of your core. If you'd like to keep track of us, come and visit us on Twitter, on Facebook, or on the blog From the Ground Up. This is Alison Crouch, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you about how to rethink your core.